So let's talk about inverse trigonometric functions. You should watch this video after you already know what sine, cosine, and tangent are. So here's our original three trigonometric functions, right? Sine, cosine, tangent. I have their definitions by their sides. Now to invert a trig function, we need to talk about how to invert a fraction, right? An inverse fraction means a fraction's reciprocal. So inverse of a fraction is simply its reciprocal. So let's take a look at what happens. We're going to start with sine. The inverse of sine, I can write that two different ways. I can write that as sine to the negative first power. That means inverse. It's also called cosecant. Its abbreviation is CSC. So the cosecant is the inverse of sine. And because sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosecant is the hypotenuse over the opposite side from theta. Next, we have the inverse of cosine. I can write the inverse of cosine as cosine to the negative first power. This is what you're actually going to see on your calculator. You'll see them as sine to the negative first power, cosine to the negative first power, and so on. The inverse of cosine is called secant, and its abbreviation is SEC. And the secant of theta then is hypotenuse over adjacent. And last but not least, we have the inverse of tangent. The inverse of tangent, I can put it as tangent to the negative first power, and again, that's what you're going to see on your calculator, but it's called the cotangent. Cotangent's abbreviation is COT, and since tangent is opposite over adjacent, cotangent then becomes adjacent over opposite. Since tangent can also be defined as sine over cosine, cotangent can be cosine over sine. So either way, it works. One more thing to put in your notes before we end today. Inverse trig functions are most commonly used when you're missing an angle measure and you know the side lengths. So that's something that we'll talk about another day. But for now, you need to know what the three inverse trig functions are and what their definitions are. Notice that sine and secant are not inverses of each other, and cosine and cosecant are not inverses of each other. That's kind of a good way to keep that in mind. S goes with C and C goes with S, because it's really common for students to get those mixed up. All right, I think that's good enough for today. I'll see you soon. Hope your day is fantastic.